Welcome back to All This Math. This is Professor Parker, and I got my Malcolm X hoodie on because the video we about to get into, or the lesson we about to get into, we're about to use what I call the Malcolm X method for factoring quadratic trinomials. The Malcolm X method for factoring quadratic trinomials. All right. Now, if you're here, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed already, hit the subscribe button. Also, when you're done watching this video, share it with at least 2 people. All right, share it with at least 2 people. And if you got any questions or comments as I break this down, please put your questions or comments in the comment section. All right, now, factoring quadratic trinomials. This is our expression, 3p squared minus 2p minus 5. 3p squared minus 2p minus 5. All right, so we're going to break that down into linear terms. This is a quadratic because the biggest exponent you see is a 2. This is a quadratic, right? And it's a trinomial because it has 3 terms. 1, 2, 3. 3 terms, trinomial, 1, 2, 3. Terms are separated by plus signs or minus signs. Plus signs or minus signs. Let's see a minus sign right there. So that separates this term from that term. I see a minus sign right here. That separates this term from that term. All right. So we got a trinomial. All right. So now, how do I start this off? The way I start this off is like this, right? I draw X. Right? Kind of a large X. And then I'm going to put numbers. I'm going to put numbers in this space, in that space, in that space, in that space. All right. To start off, let's start off with this space right here. Where do I get this number from? I get the number that I'm going to put right here from taking the lead coefficient, right? And let me back up for a second. The Malcolm X method is relevant or it's necessary, right? Because my lead coefficient is not a 1. If it was a 1, we wouldn't need to do all this, right? It would be a much simpler method. It would be a much simpler method if my lead coefficient was a 1. Write that down in your notes. If your lead coefficient in a quadratic trinomial, 1, 2, 3, quadratic because of the 2 is a 1, it's a much simpler method. I got a whole playlist where I go over examples that are much simpler where the lead coefficient is a 1. But this ain't a 1. This is a 3. So that means we got to do a little bit more work. All right? Just so you know. Now, how do you get the number that's going to go in here? I'm going to take the lead coefficient, which is 3, and I'm going to multiply it by the constant at the end, the constant on the back end. What is 3 times -5? Make sure you know your multiplication facts. You need to know what 3 times -5 is. If you know that 3 times +5 is 15, you need to know that 3 times -5 is -15. A positive times a negative always gives you a negative product. So therefore, you take that -15 and you write it in this section right here. So now I got -15. Now, what goes down here? I don't have to do any mathematics to figure out what goes down here. What goes down here is the middle term, actually the coefficient of the middle term. What's a coefficient? 3 is a coefficient. -2 is a coefficient. It's a number that's written adjacent to a variable that tells you how many of that variable term you have. So how many p's I got? I got -2 of them. How many p squares do I have? I got 3 of them. That is what the coefficient tells you. That is what the coefficient tells you. Parents, similar to a cosigner, if you're trying to get a car loan or something, a cosigner, right? You sit there at the desk next to each other, right? You know what I'm saying? When you're talking to the finance person at the car dealership. All right. Similar concept. All right. Now, what is the coefficient of the middle term? -2, not +2. That minus sign makes this a -2. It's a -2. What do you do with that? Right here. -2. Boom. Now, what goes here and what goes here? That's the question. Now, what goes here and here are 2 numbers that you have to figure out. Now, there are numbers that are both factors of -15. This is when we start playing games. It's like a puzzle now, right? 2 factors of -15 that also add up to -2. 2 factors of -15 that also add up to -2. Again, 2 factors of -15 that also add up to -2. All right, so if you are very strong with your multiplication facts, you should be able to figure this out. All right, you should be able to figure it out mentally. But just in case, you may need to write down all the factors of -15. So what are the factors of -15? The numbers that multiply together, the pairs of numbers that multiply together to make -15 as a product. So I could say -15 and 1. I could also say -5 and 3. And that's really it, unless you switch the negative signs around, right? We could also say +15 and -1. We could also say +5 and -3. All right, those are the 4 number pairs that are going to make -15, right? It ain't nothing else. Because you got to understand what a factor is. Make sure you know what a factor is, right? Factors are the numbers that can be multiplied to result in a certain multiple or product with no remainder left over. All right. I could multiply 8 times something to get -15, but there would be a remainder, or I would have to multiply 8 by a decimal, right? A decimal is not going to be a factor. A number that has a decimal in it is not going to be a factor. All right. So make sure you know what a factor is. All right. Now, next step is this. Out of these pairs, which one of them will add up to this number? Out of the factor pairs, which one is going to add up to this number at the bottom? Negative 15 and 1? No. What about negative 5 plus 3? Yes, it does. You also need to know how to add and subtract positive and negative numbers, right? I suggest using a number line. That's how I learned it back in the day, 6th grade, like 1990. You know what I'm saying? I suggest doing it that way. All right. So now, negative 5 plus 3 equals negative 2. So what do I do with these numbers? I write them on this side and this side. I put one of them over here, negative 5. And I put the other one over here. This is a positive 3. Now, from here, I rewrite the original expression, my next step, right? So if you're writing the steps down, make sure you write this as your next step. You take the original expression and you rewrite it, but you stretch it out into 4 terms. You stretch it out into 4 terms. You stretch it out into 4 terms. 4 terms from 3, 1, 2, 3 to 4. How you do that? You write the original first term over again. What do? But you break this up. This negative 2p, because negative 2 is the same thing as saying negative 5 plus 3. Think about it. Think about it. Negative 2 is the same thing as negative 5 plus 3. So I'm writing the equivalent expression. I'm just stretching it out into 4 terms, basically. So now I got minus 5p plus 3p. Notice how this is the same thing as that. Notice how this is the same thing as that. Notice how this, negative 5p plus 3p, is the same thing as minus 2p. And then I got minus 5 right here. So now I got 4 terms. Now, once I got the 4 terms, now I'm going to do something called factoring by grouping. Factoring by grouping, right? I'm going to create, it's called that because I create 2 groups, right? And each group has 2 terms in it. So I create 2 binomials. And then I take the GCF of each of those binomials. And then I take the GCF again. And then I'm going to have my final answer. So what I do is this. I look at these first 2 terms. I'm going to put parentheses around these because it's a plus sign right here. That's cool. I'm going to put a parentheses around this binomial also. I want to know what the GCF of this binomial is. Now, if you do not remember how to find a GCF of an algebraic expression, I got a whole playlist on how to find a GCF. Go into it. Go into that playlist after this video. All right? Do that. You need to know how to find a GCF when you're given an algebraic expression. So I got a 3 and a negative 5. Those 2 numbers have a common factor of 1. So I'm not worried about that. But I got a p squared and a p to the first power. When there's no exponent written, we understand that as p to the first power. All right. So my greatest common factor is p to the first power. All right. Again, I explain all of this in the playlist on finding the GCF. All right. So my GCF is going to be p. Then I put parentheses. Then I got to figure out what goes inside the parentheses. I figure that out by doing division. Original term divided by the GCF. Original term divided by the GCF. All right, 3p squared divided by p is 3p. That's another skill you gotta know how to do. You have to know this is involving exponent properties. I got a playlist on that. Whatever you need, I got it. It's here on the channel. That's why I told you to subscribe if you wasn't already subscribed. So you would be able to get everything you need. 3p squared divided by p is 3p. Why? Because 3 divided by this invisible 1 is 3. And p squared divided by p is p to the first power. That's the division property of exponent rules. All right, subtract the exponents. What's 2 minus this invisible 1 exponent? 2 minus 1 is 1. Therefore, you're left with p to the first power. All right, but brush up on that. I go into a much more detailed explanation in videos in that specific playlist. Now, negative 5p divided by p is going to be minus 5. The p's basically cancel out or divide out. Now we go over here, 3p and negative 5. The GCF of 3p and negative 5 is just 1. So we're going to have plus 1, and then we put the parentheses next to that. Divide this by 1. That's 3p. Divide this by 1. That's negative 5. What do you notice? I notice that this binomial is the same as that binomial. That's what you want. That's what you want. Because now basically what you're going to do is you're going to take the GCF again. And a GCF can be a binomial. In this case, our GCF is 3p minus 5. So another reason that I call this the Malcolm X method is because when I think about my studies of Malcolm X, I think about near the end of his life before his assassination, when he started 2 organizations. He started the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and he started the OAAU, or the Organization of Afro-American Unity, right? In which those are two different organizations, but he was the common factor because he was the founder. So think of it like this. This is Malcolm. This is Malcolm. This is the OAAU. This is the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. This is Malcolm. This is Malcolm, right? Malcolm shows up 2 times in 2 different places. He's with the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, which is the 1. He's with the OAAU, which is the P. All right. Now, we take the GCF, we write it down 1 time. We got 3P minus 5. That's our GCF. And then we take this expression right here, this times this, divided by that. That leaves you with P, right? In the other parentheses. Then we do the same thing over here. 1 times 3P minus 5 divided by the 3P minus 5 leaves us with positive 1. So we write plus 1. This is our final answer. The quantity 3P minus 5 times the quantity P plus 1. Now, why do you need to know this? Okay, reason number 1. Math, algebra specifically, helps you to think and trains your brain how to think so that you can solve problems, so that you can be a critical thinker. That is a life skill. You need that in everyday life. This is training your brain how to think, right? You may never have to take a quadratic trinomial in a public situation, in a store, on the street, on the block, and have to like take out a piece of paper and factor it. But the way that your brain will be able to operate from having practice doing this, you will be better at navigating situations. All right. Also, now in the context of math, in a math classroom, when it comes time to solve quadratic equations, if this was set up like an equation, if this said 3p squared minus 2p minus 5 equals 0 or equals 8 or equals 9, and you got to solve for p, you may need to factor. One of the methods is to factor out the expression, right, so that you can solve for p. All right. But the first reason I gave you is more important because that's about everyday life. That's about real life. It's problem solving skills, having problem solving skills. That's important. All right. So our final answer, quantity 3p minus 5 times the quantity p plus 1. I call this the Malcolm X method because why not? I mean, I'm using the X right here, right? Which reminds me of the ancestor Malcolm X. And also right here, right? Like I said, he started 2 organizations toward the end of his life, OAAU and the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, right? He's the common factor though. He's the common factor. He's in both places. He's in both places. Muslim Mosque Incorporated can be represented by 1. OAAU can be represented by the variable P. And then you put everything together, and this is what the final answer looks like, or the factored form of this expression, what it looks like. You got 2 linear binomials. We started out with a quadratic trinomial. All right, so like I said, hit the like button if you didn't already, subscribe if you didn't already. If you still got questions or comments, I welcome the questions in the comments. Put them in the comment section and share this video with at least 2 people. All right, I'll check y'all later. Peace.